Right,
Yes.
right. Thank you. This topic might be somewhat intriguing to those who are not familiar with this uh, of the term Vimuttimagga in relevance to a great treatise. But what I aim to do within the next 35 minutes or so is to hopefully make it go through these aspects that you see on this slide. These are just broad brush strokes of what I intend doing. We will first find the meaning of the word, the Pali word vimukti, discuss freedom in Buddhism, and then come to the story of this great treatise that was lost and then discovered. I would like to, I'm not a scholar of at all in Buddhism. However, I will try my best to just share a few glimpses of from the Vimuttimagga and the freedom that can be gained along the path as indicated in this treatise. And finally, a few words about Vimuttimagga and Visuddhimagga. So primarily, the Pali term Vimutti or Vimukti in Sinhala means freedom or liberation, release, escape, or not having any restrictions, freed from restrictions and or deliverance. So in that sense, Magga meaning path, is the path to liberation or deliverance, either term, or for that matter, freedom. These are very with the same shades of meaning, these synonyms. So any one of these could be used. And I think we all know that as Buddhists, we enjoy a lot of freedom in the way of Buddhist way of life and in thinking. This freedom is ingrained in the Buddhist way of thinking. However, let us appreciate what we have and therefore just go through very quickly sort of a stock taking in appreciation of this freedom that we enjoy even in the practice of the Dhamma. Even to enter the Dhamma, we take the three refuges, but as you've seen even today, we request, either we could take this on our own, it's a very voluntary act without any coercion, but if we were to request a Thero to administer these to us, it is after we request that this is done. And so is when it's becoming a bhikkhu entering in the bhikkhu sasana or bhikkhuni sasana, I believe, it is in the same way, it is at the aspirant's request that it is done. So that there is a lot of freedom, no coercion. And likewise, the very wording of the precepts is I will or I undertake. It's not thou shalt not. Again, even when the administration of the precepts was requested for, the Venerable worded it as I will, not you will. So the onus, which shows that the onus is entirely on oneself. And this is in keeping with the very principles of the Buddha's doctrine, which is one of self-reliance, because the Buddha was not a savior. So it is up to each one of us to liberate ourselves. So this absence of compulsions and rites and rituals throughout this, even in our day-to-day lives, whether it be important life events like birth, death, marriage, there really is no compulsion for reporting to the temples and so forth. Not even on a Poya day is there a compulsion. So this is the freedom that is ingrained. However, the fact that there are no punishments, as it were, shall we say, does not mean that there are no codes of conduct and guidelines, both in the following of the path and the general behavioral codes of ethics. There are actually very many, more than what meets the eye, in fact, especially for the monks. I think sometimes we lay people aren't even aware of the amount of the codes of conduct that have been laid out by the Buddha in the Vinaya. For example, even how to partake of meals, the sound that one makes when one is, lapping up the food or looking at the other's arms bowl, things are all, everything is very clearly mentioned. So probably the world's first table manners came from the Buddha. Likewise, how to clean a kuti, their room, the system, a very systematic way of doing this. And we heard last week even the manner of speech, and the speech craft was something that has been clearly mentioned. So the lack of punishment, we agree, is not there, for the simple reason that any transgression of these precepts it has its inbuilt punishment. It's not coming from the Buddha, who is not a god, a punishing god, or he was not a god. It's the amassing of akusala kamma or unwholesome kamma, if one breaks the precepts, and that would lead to a loss of, that would lead to fear and repentance. So if one wants freedom from fear, one has to safeguard the three doors, and especially in the way of precepts, primarily one's actions and speech and actions, and also thoughts. So this is where we have this beautiful state in the Dhammapada, the sayings, where the Buddha says that often what we are fearing is the non-fearsome is what we are fearing. Whereas the Buddha says, see fear in the fearsome. And what is fearsome? Akusala kamma. So that is what we have to actually fear. Then there is also this line, fear rises in the unwise, which is because the wise would have preserved the precepts, been careful on that score, and therefore there is nothing to fear. There is also this sutta. Of course, there are many suttas, like the many suttas. I have only mentioned one here, where the Buddha says that with purity of defilements and metta and meditative metta, developing metta in one's mind, there won't be fear even in the wilderness. And this is a very beautiful sutta where the Buddha says that he too, as far as I understand, he too had this originally the fears when he was alone in the wilderness, but how purity and metta. And it is a fact that even today we have forest dwelling monks, even in Sri Lanka, in very difficult terrains, and where is obviously snake infested places, and where there is elephant man conflict, Laggala and places, but we don't hear of monks or with these lay meditators out there, forest dwellers, being coming to grief in these fashions. So there seems to it is rather evident this fact expressed in the Dhamma. So to go on, let us look at more sort of generic terms, the freedom in Buddhism. There is the freedom of thought and the freedom of investigation, which is something very, very remarkable. And when Buddha delivered this very sort of groundbreaking, I should say, sutta, known as the Kesamutti or Kalama Sutta, to the Kalamas in a place called Kesamutti, who asked the Buddha, there are so many ascetics coming and telling us their own view of our own sort of aspect of the spiritual aspects, which one do we believe? And then the Buddha said, do not blindly believe because it's claimed to be true, or even if it's tested. And to do so only when you know for yourself that it is wholesome, you work it out for yourself, it's wholesome and it is blameless. And of course, it's not entirely to us to decide just whatever, but also consider whether the words of the wise, whether it's praised by the wise, and also constant investigation. And of course, there are a lot more. The sutta, this is not the time for this sutta. We have heard this sutta before. And I think somewhere in April, there will be one particular meeting devoted to this. So this here is the stupa in Bihar that has been erected, I believe, by Emperor Asoka, and said to be at the site where this unique sutta was delivered on how to decide between different opinions. But it means that the man had, so it is known as humanity's first charter on free inquiry, and it came from the Buddha. Now, of course, there is a lot of intellectual freedom. The very foremost characteristic of the Dhamma, we were first here that it's swakato, meaning it's clearly enunciated. But even so, we are then told that it invites investigation. Ehipassiko, which is what it means. So you have to come and see rather than come and believe. For which reason Buddhists believe because they know. They have to consider whether this is, whether it suits, whether it is worthy of, and so you believe because you know rather than you know because you believe. Then likewise, there is spiritual freedom, a lot of religious tolerance. We know that newcomers to the who came to the Buddha and were convinced on the Dhamma and wanted to take to it, the Buddha advised them to go back. Sometimes he advised them to go back to he said, now the path, you can continue this path. Householder, one was in the Upali Sutta, and then the General Siha were told, you have been with that ascetic for so long, you and your family have been supporters, continue to do so, but you know the path, you can continue this. So it was not on a head count because the Buddha was completely lacking in ego. He was able to do this, and that was the spiritual freedom and religious tolerance. Then, of course, we know there was social equality, whether it was class or caste. We know that Sunita, a scavenger, and so many other instances where it cut through, and at a time when the caste issue was rampant and religious, there were only the Brahmin class could access the religions. That was not so. Buddha opened the doors of Nibbana to everybody. And we know of so many, many stories, which is too long to mention here, of the social equality and justice and tolerance. And also, of course, gender equality. So it is no wonder that the Buddha is termed the father of spiritual democracy. And again, we have this fairly revolutionary statement in the Vasala Sutta, where the Buddha says it's not by birth, but by deed that one becomes an outcast or Brahmin. In this, again, Sutta, Kammana Vasalo Hoti, Kammana Hoti Brahmano. It is entirely not by birth. So he cut through and gave all this social equality. And when it comes to gender equality, I think this pioneering effort on the Buddha, probably the world's first women's organization, was initiated by the Buddha. And we see here just one picture of the descendants of that organization, who are now all over the world scattered. It's a global movement. So with all these freedoms, and obviously if the precepts are all observed, if one could think of a society where such precepts will never broken, it would be the most free place, free of harm, free of being, any thought of thieving or cheating. But what other freedom is wanted? And we'll come to this Vimukti, freedom from suffering, illness, aging, death, loss. All religions, of course, offer happiness. That is why I know there is a sense of morality, and the offer of happiness is there ingrained in every religion. However, in Buddhism, the highest happiness, as we know, is Nibbanam Paramang Sukham. The highest happiness is Nibbana. And how then is Nibbana different to what is there unique about Nibbana? It is a freedom from the cycle of births. It's the cycle of being born, dying, and being reborn. That is the end, and that we must remember is the ultimate purpose, certainly of Theravada Buddhism, not even through the path of Bodhisattva, but directly Nibbana Gamin Paramang Hitaya. That's a line we hear in the Ratana Sutta, the Sutta of the Jewels, I think almost daily in most Buddhist homes and environments. But we sort of don't realize that this is the ultimate purpose of being a Buddhist and the whole purpose of it. So to escape the fetters, to break through this cycle, one is bound to samsara. With sort of chains or fetters, I believe refers to like the ropes or chains that a prisoner is, tied down and imprisoned with. I remember being in prison. I used to be in and out of prison, not as a prisoner, but on Poya days, about 15, for a couple of years I did that in the women's section in Velikada. And one day inside there, this really struck me that I was also in a sort of a prison. So these are the fetters that bind us to samsara. And there are suttas, we often hear of the Dasa Samyojana Sutta, 10 fetters, and sometimes 7 fetters, but it is to free oneself from these fetters that the Noble Eightfold Path is the path to follow. And if one were to get this type of freedom, which is to get freed from samsara. I have listed here the 7 fetters and 10 fetters. Buddha's teaching has absolutely no contradictions. So there's nothing to think that why then 7 and why then 10. I believe it depends on the audience. Sometimes you can say things with some degree of brevity and it is understood. Or sometimes, depending on the audience, one could go into greater length and explain it. But really, if you look at this, sensual desire, ill will, and wrong views and doubt are common to both. And here it's expanded the desire for existence, or bhavatanha, or bhavaraga, as it's said here, is further divided here as to be born in the formless or the form worlds, the arupa raga, rupa raga, and so forth. So that has been split out, but really it's the same. The 7 sapta buddhang, sapta samyojana, and the 10 fetters are very much the same. At this point, I would like to, before we go into Vimuttimagga, having done this much of preamble, fairly long though, I would like to suggest that we have a moment's introspection into ourselves. Do we really want to break through this cycle and not be ever born again? This is a question one must ask oneself and really take to it. And in this, it's a question, do I really want Nibbana? One could also, I think, because the ultimate purpose of Buddhism is Nibbana, we could word the question to ourselves, why am I a Buddhist? But then, of course, in the time of the Buddha, I don't think there were Buddhists, there were Shravakas. So that is what we all are, listeners. And of course, the servants of the Buddha can be called Sevakas. But with Savaka, Sevaka, or Buddhist, or whatever, do I really want this? Is something that we have to ask ourselves and work on that. There is no compulsion as it is, total freedom for oneself. But I would like to just mention that sutta on the burning house that I think you've all heard, but let me just go through it. And up on the screen is Bertolt Brecht, a German playwright, well known, what we call the Buddha's parable of the burning house, which he said to us. And I just like to read that how when the Buddha opened the door to a house that was on fire and asked the people to come out, well, we read saying, but those people seemed to, and this is covered a little bit, but they were in no hurry. One of them, while the heat was already scorching his eyebrows, had asked the Buddha, what is it like outside? Is there another house for us? And so forth. And they were in no hurry to come out. They were questioning, what is this other freedom like? Which is often what we know. People wonder, what is Nibbana? Is it nothingness, or is it this, or is it that? When in fact, our house is certainly on fire today. One has to only switch on the world news, even if one doesn't realize the pandemics and everything else that has, even more than in the time of the Buddha, I would say, the house is on fire. So this ends saying the Buddha walked out again without answering. And Professor Carlo Fonseca's Sinhala version of this is really very enjoyable, but I'm not bringing that up here. It is available on YouTube to anybody, highly commendable and quite hilarious, in fact, about not wanting to escape this house that is on fire. Now let us get on to Vimuttimagga, which is the name of a treatise, a practice manual, which has been presented very systematically in a very, very ancient document. In the 1st or 2nd century, and believed to be in the time of King Vasabha, is also said that this was written, and the author is Arahant Upatissa. That much is known, but whether Upatissa is claimed to have been a Sinhalese monk and it was written in Sri Lanka is how it is thought by many, although there have been some suggestions that it was brought to Sri Lanka from India. The original was probably in Pali or hybrid Sanskrit. If it was in Pali, probably since Pali, I think, doesn't have a script, it would have been written in Sinhala. Unfortunately, we don't know the answer to this because that book is lost. Probably written in the Mahavihara complex or Abhayagiri. Again, this is debated. However, it is of Theravada tradition. That has been now accepted. There are little areas where there is overlap, but it is considered the Theravada tradition by the majority view and the final conclusion by scholars. And this book has been very in detail studied. Now, the original in Pali was lost. Now, this is a very unfortunate and sad, upsetting situation that such a valuable treatise, such an ancient treatise was lost. And it is believed that, I think many of you have heard that books were burnt once upon a time in this country, Buddhist books and other Ola leaves, I suppose. And I have checked as to exactly why. I don't get a definitive answer. There was a conflict, sort of division of opinions and factional differences, which grew into perhaps hatred and even enmity between Mahavihara complex and Abhayagiriya once upon a time. There was political angle to this as well, wanting to curry favor with the particular king at that time who took to the Abhayagiriya side, took up that side for a while, and so on and so forth, whether the burning of books took place entirely with that, or there is also a view that Vimuttimagga was got rid of once Visuddhimagga was written. That was in the 5th century, several centuries later, and they said, oh, now that we have Visuddhimagga, we don't need Vimuttimagga, and Vimuttimagga was destroyed. However, it was known that a Chinese version had survived, and also a part of the book in Tibetan. But this was not available to us. And I believe Venerable Jnanatiloka visited Japan immediately after the First World War, and he came across this, but he couldn't find a translator, and therefore was unhappy that he couldn't still resurrect this document back to any readable form. And I would now like to introduce to you two very active members of the servants of the Buddha in its earliest time of the society. The society started in 1921, and the first treasurer, Mr. Oliver Soisa or Mr. W.J. Soisa, who introduced this young gentleman, Victor Pulle. He was Victor Emmanuel Pulle, a very unique character. Time doesn't permit to go into his life story. Victor Emmanuel Pulle was had a very questioning mind, and at the age of 11, he was at a Catholic upbringing. I think it was at St. Sebastian's, or sorry, St. Benedict's, one of those two schools. When he said, when he was told God made man, he immediately said, who made God? And he was reprimanded and not to sort of question the antecedents of God. And ever since, and on all fronts, it was a huge thirst for knowledge. And he read way into midnight by candlelight without his mother's awareness. And that was he. And he was introduced to the servants of the Buddha. For sure, I know that he was the one who wrote the Blessings, which is the first publication of the servants of the Buddha. It started in 1921. So he was there from the very, very early days. He's not considered a founding member, but he has obviously been at the very early stages. And this book, The Blessing, was a series of publications and of course edited by Dr. Cassius Pereira, the founder and the founder president, who later ordained as Venerable Kashyapa. Now, Victor Pulle was introduced to George Praylis, yet another young astute mind. They both had Catholic upbringings, and they were introduced by, again, to each other also. I have that from so both of them then ordained as Venerable Soma. The sitting positions have now changed on these two slides. Right and left have been inverted. This is Venerable Soma on the right, and Venerable came in there. These two were great friends, and their names are in the Servants of the Buddha in the very first book of minutes as well. And so I think I'm not wrong in thinking that the Servants of the Buddha was in some small way, even a springboard for their spiritual journey. They were both great active monks, and these two monks, just to prove my point of what I said, we have here when Venerable Soma passed away. He passed away quite young, in the sense at the age of 62 years. We have this written by one Shirley Pulle Tisera, that Venerable Soma's contribution to Buddhism in Sri Lanka began sometime in 1920 when he met, as I said, Oliver Soisa. And he was one of the, this is covered for me, one of the, I think, early members of the Servants of the Buddha, the well-known association with its headquarters at Lorries Road, Colombo 4. And he was, as I said, actively involved in the publication of Blessing. So these two, Venerable Soma and Venerable Keminder, decided to go to Burma for their higher ordination, and they left in 1935, first to China, because they were keen on finding this Chinese literature on the Dhamma. But there was a Sino-Japanese war then, and instead of, they were rerouted to Japan. And they found their way, having gone for a lecture to the University of Tokyo, they were directed here to this temple in a place called Kawatana, on a very beautiful setting on top of a mountain in Nagasaki. And there, the monk there, they claim, Venerable came in the writings, I can quote, says that you couldn't find a more hospitable host. And there they found one day, they were taken around the library in that temple. And in a glass fronted cupboard, the monk, the chief monk, just said these 3 volumes, there were 3 thin volumes, were written in Sri Lanka, in Ceylon or Sri Lanka, by a Sinhalese monk called Arahant Upatissa, and this is Vimuttimagga. Now, how it got to China was probably in the 5th century through with Fahian, 5th or 6th, probably, we don't know. And it had been definitely, we know, in the 6th century, translated into Chinese by the name of Tripitaka Sangapala of Funan, which was in Rio. And ever since Arahant Upatissa, this book had great acclaim, and Arahant Upatissa was known as the Great Light of Rio. Rio was the place where it was translated. And this is the Chinese name. I don't know how to pronounce it, for Vimuttimagga, and the name Vimuttimagga was also preserved. So when this happened, Venerable Soma and Venerable came in the both with one voice said that we'd like to translate this. And it so happened that that chief monk, their host, was a very academic and scholarly monk who was conversant with Chinese, and they immediately set about things. And in Venerable came in those words that the 3 of them were responsible for word-to-word translations, draft translations, copying, cyclostyling, binding, and so forth. There were lots of problems because there was a war on there at the time, and then the Second World War came along. However, he said that Somatera worked 20 of the 24 hours he was at it, and they did translate it into English. And the outcome was so happy. Venerable Ehara, the main translator, named the new wing, the temple had a new wing established, and he called it the Lion Hall. He said, in honor of the Lion Isle from which the 2 of you have come. And this is what happened. And they brought this back. They had sent it out to 50 scholars as well, including Venerable Jnanatiloka, who had been very happy to receive this thing. However, it didn't get published till after Somatera died, because he had been saying, well, we have done our work, let somebody publish it, and it just lay there. But a year after, by 1961, that it was first published. And I would like to now take you to a few glimpses of from this book. It is too vast a treatise for me to go through in detail. But it begins with saying, as we know, we can realize for ourselves that Vimukti, freedom, would mean really, by that time, it is a right view, because it's the final Vimukti would come with right view, as we know. So the 2 requisites for right view, as stated here, and is also generally accepted now, is Parato Goshita, which is hearing the voice of others, hearing the Dhamma, and Yoniso Manasikarya, or right awareness, which one could think, why only 2 here for the final stage of Vimukti, when at the start of the spiritual, in the state of Soan, the Samannapala Sutta and so forth will give 4 steps. But then there are 2 embodied here, the Kalyana Mitta and the Dhammasavana are both there in the Parato Goshita. Obviously, by this stage, you need not be deciding who is a Kalyana Mitta, and that need not be specified. Such an advanced person would be able to make that out. And similarly, Yoniso Manasikarya, and embedded here would be the Dhamma Patipatya, which are that is how there were 4 at the start, and now it has come down to 2. Anyway, there is no contradiction again, as I said before. And what this book primarily deals with is nothing new than what we all know, which are the 3 aspects of the Noble Eightfold Path: Sila, Samadhi, and Prajna. So the book entirely deals with this, and it is a practical and experiential advice. And the book has a sense of urgency in the way it is written, rather than in a scholarly way of analyzing everything. It does analyze, but it's very, very detailed, but also it gets on with the job, and it's very practical. Now, I would like to, this book has a very, at least to me, I found this aspect worthy of sharing. Probably you are way ahead of me and you have already realized this, in which case I beg your forgiveness. But to me, this seemed very nice, a way of seeing that Sila brings, because we are now looking for freedom, aren't we, Vimukti, and we have to see how we get to this freedom along this path. Now, purification of virtue, as this is how it's stated, but as we know, it's purification virtue, meaning speech and actions primarily in Sila. That does not mean the thoughts are not getting purified. You can't purify your actions and speech without some degree of purification of your thoughts, but this is primarily what it is. And if one achieves this, one does come to happiness. The happiness of the fault-free, a moral joy or happiness of being fault-free. Similarly, samadhi, the next one, or concentration, the meditative concentration with mindfulness, brings purification of thoughts. And that will give the happiness of tranquility, the meditative tranquility and that happiness that it gives. And then the purification of views is what Panya gives along. So I thought this was very clear, at least to me. It clarified the process, the stepwise. And that once you have purification of views, means you've got rid of all your wrong views and you're also clinging to views, even if they are right, is the realization. And realization means some sort of, it's a happiness again, no doubt. Now, this word happiness or sukha, as many of you know, if not all of you, that these Pali words are very difficult to be translated, some Pali words, to get that exact shade of meaning. Happiness, I think, is not appropriate, though it's here, as quite the happiness that you and I think of. It's a sense of ease, a sense of peace that it gets by having a purity of virtue, the purity of thoughts, and the tranquility, and the purity of views. And at this point, I felt that at least for me, in the Satipatthana, the Buddha starts the Satipatthana as we did this talk by giving the aims. And when he starts that this is the one soul path, ekayano maggo, he says, the first thing he says is sattanam visuddhya, but he doesn't stop there. So sattanam visuddhya is purification. Then he mentions the soka parideva samatikkamaya, dukkha domana sattangamaya. Those things are getting rid of soka parideva, sorrow, lamentation, pain, and so forth, grief. Is basically happiness, isn't it, if you don't have those? So then, here we are, the sense of ease or happiness. And then this realization, and then the Buddha, in the Satipatthana, in that time, which is the soul path, and absolutely important sutta, whether it's in the Majjhima Nikaya or in the Digha Nikaya. The third he mentions is Nyayasa Adhigamaya. So there is a Nyaya, the way I am not a Pali scholar at all. I believe the realization, the Jnana that comes through the understanding. But realization means understanding. Understanding means knowledge. So that is what it is. And then Nibbana Satchakiriyaya. So those what he mentioned as the aims are here in this Sila Samadhi Prajna, very clearly shown in Vimuttimagga. explicitly in words. I mean, I have tabulated this in a form of a grid or table, but this is now not how it goes, but it is explained in a more verbose manner. So I thought that this was really, in a nutshell, a very worthy bit of way of looking at it. At least it was to me. And hence I thought I would share this. And that also explains, with those last two added, with the realization and the nibbana, I think we have all heard, how the eightfold path is sometimes mentioned by the Buddha as a tenfold path. Not often. It's the eightfold path that we hear more often, the Aryo Attangiko Maggo, from the Dhammacakka onwards, which is actually the first thing he says after telling about the middle path, the Dveme Bhikkave Anta. And this, for that matter, those Parato Goshita and Yoniso Manasikara also are Dveme Bhikkave. What are the two Bhikkave for the Vimukti? And he said Parato Goshita in another sutta. But there we heard that the two extremes of Kama Sukalya, Kanu Yoga, and Atta Kilamandanu Yoga, giving self-mortification or too much of sense pleasures. You start with that, but then immediately, even before giving the first noble truth, the Buddha gives the fourth noble truth, which is the Aryo Attangiko Maggo. If we look at the Dhammacakka, because when he asked what then is this path, at that time he said that I took, because he had to convince then his former friends or associates who had thought that he had left the path, saying that I took the middle path. So he says, what is this middle path? Majjhima Patipada, and he says it is Aryo Attangiko Maggo. But so it's Aryo Attangiko Maggo throughout. There are times when he has brought it to tenfold path. And I see that here in that previous slide, it explains how the right knowledge and the right liberation comes through, because right knowledge, as we saw there was knowledge, the right, with wisdom, we got a realization, which is insight, which comes directly by living the Eight Noble Path. Finally, that final right knowledge, one comes face to face with reality and also face to face with oneself, I think, exactly what you are. And that then sets the stage for the mind to be able to let go. That last bit even of craving, I'm sure when we come there, I haven't come there, I mean, not anywhere near there. So those of you who are near there might appreciate this, already know it, but it sets the stage for the mind to be liberated. And that is then how the Samma Jnana and Samma Vimukti can be added to the Eightfold Path. After Samma Sati, Samma Samadhi, there is a Samma Jnana and a Samma Vimukti, which is not often mentioned though, probably because getting there is not that common. I don't know. Let us now proceed to the benefits of practicing each of these three, the triple training, as they called it, as Venerable Soma and Venerable Kemin have called it. The Sila, if one hasn't got right up to the Vimukti, but nevertheless one has improved one's Sila or even come to almost near fulfilling that aspect, but not the Samadhi and the Panya yet. But you start with Sila, as we know. One can transcend the stages of regress, as they have called it there, meaning the hell realms of hell, apayas. So if Sila that's one of the main benefits there. Apart from, of course, that is, now we are thinking of all this is, of course, of the supramundane, by the way. These three I should have perhaps mentioned. In Vimuttimagga, Sila, Samadhi, Prajna become Adi Sila, Adi Chitta, and Adi Panya, because it's now not the mundane, but the supramundane, not the lokiya, but the lokottara level that Vimuttimagga is basically decides on, reflects on, deals with. Transcends the stages of regress, Sila, the apayas, but Samadhi, with better, one fulfills that aspect and one masters that. The sense planes can be mastered, and then in very, very high Samadhi states obviously it's the Brahmaloka that one can perhaps be left with yet till one gets the full liberation. And then with Panya, fully acquiring the Panya in its fullest would transcend all becomings. I will leave these 2 slides and get to, because we have to proceed. There are lots of different types of sila mentioned, the sila of usage and prohibitions, as we know, charita sila, varita sila, the bad, the good, the mundane, supramundane, the measurable, immeasurable silas, the conditional, unconditional, and so forth, and the nissita sila, unnissita sila, where there is something you expect out of your doing this, or you are non-dependent on any type of craving. So the book has, it's a very detailed and a very ancient, so we can see that in very early Buddhist times, this was there. And very interestingly, levels of sila. This is just one example I have taken, where actually we came across these 3 recently once when we were having a ad hoc discussion in the Servants of the Buddha at one of our meetings. What is Chetana Sila or volitional Sila, where I will not do evil because I will have to suffer for it. There was one member who quite rightly contributed, saying that when working with a very difficult boss, he felt he would somehow bite the bullet and wait because he needed his signature at the end of that appointment and that job. But that is also Sila, but that is this type of Sila, Chetana Sila. Then, of course, there is the Sila of Veramani, where as a precept, or you have decided to purify your, purification, your defilements. So that wasn't there in the first one. You were needing to just somehow manage. And of course, there was some control, no doubt, that Sila. But this is a Veramani Sila, sorry. But then we go on to the highest level when yet another member said how she is angry when a 3-wheeler cuts in front of her, and she says, then she says, oh, this is anger. We were talking of anger that day. This is anger, and manages to stifle it. Now, that is avitikama sila, where as it is bubbling up from the latent stage, you see it. So these are 3 levels of sila. So this is what I'm just a glimpse of what the Vimuttimagga offers. Now, I am no scholar, as I said, and I don't want to venture into this of making a comparative study of these 2. Vimuttimagga is a household word in Theravada countries. It is considered the greatest non-canonical work and the Buddha Gosatera is considered the most famous commentator of Theravada. From the Mahavansa downwards, Vimuttimagga is praised. And it is certainly longer and more comprehensive than Vimuttimagga. But Vimuttimagga is much less known. And I felt it was my reason I felt that it was so less known that I would like to share it. And also, I had a little agenda of showing some even vague or indirect connection with the servants of the Buddha. Now, there are, of course, recent translations, as recent as 2021. In the University of Hong Kong, in the Center of Buddhist Studies, there is this book, Path of Freedom, which might be even more readable than the other 2. I'm not recommending reading this book. But a comparative study of these was done even in 1937, that is before Vimuttimagga in English came into print. But as you know, the copies were circulated everywhere. 50 copies were distributed to scholars. And so it was out in the open that this had been discovered. At this particular Bhikkhu Analayo's work, here, this is the reference, treatise on the path to liberation, which is mukti, and the path of purification, which is visuddhi. He does the 2. This is the title of his works, and that's the reference, Hunyan Buddhist Studies. It's available online. And if I may quote some of those, Bhikkhu Analayo's evaluation of the different, there are a lot of similarities, actually, even to a somebody like me, at the bottom of the scale, there is a resemblance between Vimuttimagga. I was fortunate in following a course of Sutta Central did a beautiful course, and on Vimuttimagga. So hot on that, I found the Vimuttimagga having resemblance, no doubt. So also the Vimuttimagga doesn't mention, refers to Venerable Upatissa, but there are repeated references to some who propose. And it is thought that that some refers to Venerable Upatissa. This has been the view of many who studied these two. By saying that the reference either he agreed or sometimes he rejected. Buddhaghosa, who wrote Visuddhimagga me. And this is a highly probable supposition that Buddhaghosa knew that there was a version of, or had seen, had a view of a path to liberation is stated. And there were references for this, but I haven't made the slide too heavy, putting all the references, but anyone who's interested, if you go to online, Bhikkhu Analayo's, that treatise on Vimuttimagga, you get this, and a lot more. It's a very rewarding exercise to read that. There seems no doubt of Buddhaghosa's use of the older text is a view of another. And Visuddhimagga can be considered to be the work of Buddhaghosa. Sorry, Visuddhimagga considered to be the work of Buddhaghosa is in fact a revised version of Vimuttimagga. Is somebody called Norman, a scholar, has said that. These are the very words. So I wouldn't go so far as that. I wouldn't know, frankly, but I've just placed this inside. But what I would like to comment on is that what this Vimuttimagga or path to liberation does show is that there is a lot of value in the Chinese literature for Buddhist studies, and there's a lot of potential for that. And the material translated into Chinese is a treasure trove for deepening our understanding and the developments in the history of Buddhist thought. And so somewhere somebody took this from Sri Lanka to China. As we know, even the Bhikkhuni order, the traditions were taken. So things got preserved in China. And this is something that we have to appreciate. And I would like to stop at that, reiterating that I was no scholar, and I hope I have done at least a teeny bit of justice to this great works, which I found in my possession, in my cupboard. This is Vimuttimagga. I'm sad to say it's such a tacky, but it is the first edition. And I had never read it. I actually had thought it was Visuddhimagga and had a more colorful new Visuddhimagga with me. And when I just about 8 weeks ago took this out, and much to my joy, it has been autographed by Keminda Thera. I can't know whether I'm this view. There you are. And to Dr. And it has been presented to my husband. And there it lay there without my knowing until I took it up. And then I thought I would share some of these thoughts with you. This is Venerable Keminda, who has actually gifted it, the first edition of Vimuttimagga. And so when we today, I hope I have also done justice. I will just show these two monks. Here we have Venerable Soma and again Venerable Keminda. And you can see they did lots of great things for the Sasana. And here on the first they cover this same picture. This was the Sri Lankan Buddhist mission, the first Sri Lankan Buddhist mission to Germany, when they set up the Berlin Buddhist Vihara, which had already been there, but they changed hands and came into the Sri Lankan. So there are many, many things that these two monks, Venerable Keminda lived to a very old age and was in a meditative island hermitage in the south, I know, even sometime in 1999 or 2000, but I haven't been able to find the year of his passing away. And with that, I think I will stop there and thank you for your patience listening.
So, dear Dhamma friends, we have listened